Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're here today with our Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday episode, where we are going to be breaking down the 12 physical signs you're suffering from anxiety. So, one of the biggest health-based issues right now is anxiety. There is no doubt about it, in my opinion. Many people walking around with low-level anxiety that hasn't been diagnosed yet, not that they should necessarily be medicated for it, but they're walking around dealing with low-level anxiety, not knowing about it, and it is actually affecting their life. So my goal for today's show is to share with you the actual physical signs. So it's not just inside of the head, but the actual physical signs that your body is suffering from a level of anxiety. So a level of unease that's affecting now your body, not just the way that you think. So my goal with this is not to make you feel bad about yourself or that it's not okay to be anxious. It is. It is actually okay to be anxious. When we're anxious about something, if you look into the psychology behind it, it's often because we're worrying about something that we believe may happen in the future. Maybe it happens again, or maybe it's the unknown, and we feel a lack of control. We have fear around this unresolved issue. So my greatest recommendation to you is to simply look into that. There's a great exercise, we'll put it this way. Tim Ferriss was the first one that shared it with me, and it's called fear setting. So if you go back, we'll try to link up that show for you today. So to make this easier and not go down a different rabbit hole, head on over to stephencabral.com/1636, and I'll try to link up the fear setting episode I did. It's a Mindset and Motivation Monday show that I do on Mondays, and this one specifically on fear setting that I think will help with some of the anxiety you might be experiencing. So what I want to do is now dive right into some of those physical-based symptoms. And what I want to share with you is this. So the very first symptom is a lot of people are experiencing a more rapid heart rate. Now, you may not know this except for the fact that you might just say, well, my heart's beating a little bit faster, or I can kind of feel it in my neck, almost like a pulsating. And a lot of people say, like, I can feel my heartbeat in my neck or in my throat. When they say that, I almost always know straight out of the gates, we're talking about a rise in adrenaline or epinephrine. And this is important because pretty much all of the symptoms here that we're going to talk about come from an increase in what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And if you're new to the podcast, you haven't heard that before, that basically is another term for the fight or flight. And the fight or flight happens essentially in the brain. We think about it really in the body, but it happens in the brain. So the brain is the epicenter of the control center, essentially. And we use the proprioceptor part of our nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, to give us a link to our outside environment, or at least what we believe is in our outside environment through that peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system tells your brain, basically what you're thinking is, I'm scared. I'm fearful, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what's going to happen. Your brain perceives that as stress. The hypothalamus, which is a particular part of the brain, sends signals to the pituitary gland, which then sends signals to the adrenals. If you want the full breakdown, I've done podcasts on that as well, exactly how it works. But it's really the brain that tells eventually the adrenals, after two pieces of the brain, tell the adrenals to produce this type of hormone, which is going to get the body to essentially into a state of fight or flight. And again, I've gone through that on previous shows, but I want to keep it baseline today, right at that level that we need to know about foundationally. So the adrenals start to produce something called norepinephrine or adrenaline. So if we look at that, it's going to start to constrict some of the arteries, maybe raise the blood pressure. It's going to get a little bit of the heart rate going. If I tell too much of this, I'm going to give all the symptoms away. But that is actually normal. That's a normal response. So please don't think that these aren't normal responses. Your body is actually responding to your brain, to your thoughts. So don't ever believe that your mind and body aren't related and connected. They are. Those signals go from your brain straight down your spinal cord. And off of your spinal cord are your nerves. Parasympathetic nerves sympathetic nerves. The sympathetic nervous system activates more of the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic is more of the rest and relax. And we actually turn them on by our thoughts, our breathing, etc. Well, one of those, when we start to get revved up, is we start to speed up heart rate, right? Because we're getting ready to either run away, we're getting ready to fight, or if we look deeper into this, which I've done a show on this as well, called the polyvagal nerve theory, we actually go into a state of freeze, which is very different. So first symptom is this, increased heart rate. Now, if you wear an oximeter, really simple device. Again, it's just OXI and then it's meter. And you just put it on your index finger. It's pretty simple. I've got mine. I always have it on my desk here. And when you pop it on, you're actually looking for your oxygen. So your oxygen should be 96 to 99, 100%, depending on what your oximeter goes to. And the higher, the better, right? I mean, having a good oxygen rating using that little infrared beam is great. And then your heart rate, though, you want to make sure that you have a good low resting heart rate. Now, a lot of people say, well, it should be this, it should be that. Realistically, if you're just going about your daily work, you're in a relaxed state, it should be in the 60s, right? It can be anywhere from the 50s to the 70s. Once you get into the 80s and above, and certainly the 90s, think about it. Your body is like walking. It's at like a walking pace even when you're seated. So I've worked with many, many private wellness clients, and we look at the resting heart rate. The resting heart rate is in the high 80s, low 90s. And I say, no wonder why you're exhausted. And that is one of our symptoms. That's our next one. You're tired. You're tired because you are waging a battle inside of your body all day long, or at least when you're feeling anxious. That is exhausting. When you are pumping out adrenaline as well as cortisol, getting you in a state of fight or flight, whether you're moving your body or not, you're tired because the internal workings of your body are on. Maybe physically you're not walking around, you're not jogging, you're not exercising, whatever it might be, but for sure you are getting those stress hormones pumping. And the stress hormones are the aldosterone, norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, and we'll throw in adrenaline as well. So the problem is all this stress, right? All this stress leading to the anxiety, or the anxiety leading to this type of exhaustion stress, it starts to affect a lot of other parts of your life as well. We'll get into all of those today. The next one I want to share with you is this, though. So a lot of people think of muscle stiffness or pain in the body as just simply overuse or injuries from the past, whatever it might be. I'm telling you right now, people hold tension. They hold anxiety in their muscles, and it can be in the joints as well. Never mind cortisol over time and stress hormones over time can create inflammation. I know cortisol is an anti-inflammatory. It is. In the short term, it works great as an anti-inflammatory. Chronic stress, well, that's inflammatory. So chronic stress leads to catabolism. Catabolism leads to damage of the body, which leads to inflammation and cleanup. So when we look at this, we have to understand that tension in the neck, tension in the lower back, tension in the hips, tension in the psoas muscles, this can be related to anxiety. There's a direct correlation with that, right? So people are trying to stretch out all day long. And the problem is, until you get the stress underway, you're going to have to stretch every single day all the time in order to get rid of those knots in the upper trapezius muscles, the pain in the lower back. You really need to assess, is there something else going on? And the next one is this, kind of sticking with the muscles, or the body at least, increased sweating. If you have increased your sweating for what you can say is no reason at all, it's not a hot day, you haven't gone for a jog, whatever it might be, but you're sweating that much more, can be a sign of anxiety. Remember, when you speed up the heart rate, your body's doing more work, right? And so when we look at that stress production, you can actually produce higher amounts of cortisol and higher amounts of sweating as well. It's a big one. It really is. I know a lot of people just go to their doctor and they say, oh, it's hyperhidrosis. It's all these different things. I'm not sure. Yes, some people for sure are more apt to sweating, but unless you've run a lab like the stress hormones mood metabolism lab to actually look at your cortisol levels, look at your thyroid levels, look at your testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, I don't know. I'm not buying that yet. I want to see what a person's stress hormones are before I actually, I would say, okay, go to your doctor and get that diagnosis, which even then is a little off base, but we'll leave that for another day. All right. This is one that I ask people about. So I literally asked this question lately, because if they've been experiencing more anxiety lately, have you been more startled? Meaning someone just like touches your back and all of a sudden you jump, or you hear a noise and you pop up more. You might not know it, But that is definitely a sign that you're on edge. And you might say, well, yeah, I guess I'm on edge. But that is also a sign of underlying anxiety. Underlying anxiety, you could say it's underlying stress, and I would agree with you. But we're talking about being anxious about that stress right now. We're not talking about it being an angry response to stress or some type of temper-based response to stress. We're talking about an anxious response to stress and being easily startled by a noise, someone just touching you or you being worried that something's there, someone's there. Now that can be part of that as well. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, couple more. Work with now 3 particular individuals. Luckily, they've all been able to be helped, but all of them with something called achalasia. Again, we give a name to everything. But essentially it means you have difficulty swallowing food, you choke on food more often, difficult to swallow, and every single time we're correlating it, with high stress. High stress, typically anxiety. Some people only get it when they go out to dinner with others. Other people get it just when at a particular place, like only at work, whatever it might be. I'm not giving you a disease-based diagnosis. We don't diagnose disease. We don't treat disease. We don't cure disease. What we do is look at underlying root causes. And low-level anxiety and stress is absolutely one of those, of the throat feeling more tight, right? Oftentimes, kind of the voice trembles a little bit as well, right? Everything is a little tight. Everything is a little locked up. Okay, that's a big one that I wanted to share with you. Along the line of the muscles, shakiness, right? Not talking about low blood sugar, not necessarily talking about low blood pressure, although those can be factors, and they can be factored in with stress as well, because you tend to use up a lot more glucose when you're stressed, at least for more the ectomorph body type. But if you're a little bit more shaky, for sure, that can be that nervous system. That nervous system is just on high alert. It's just buzzing, and you end up with a little bit of shakiness around the hands, or maybe you're someone that kind of bounces your feet a lot or bounces your leg a lot, always moving, can't sit still. It's another sign potentially of underlying low levels of anxiety or high levels of anxiety for sure. So many people in my practice right now that we help them with their digestive issues. There's no doubt about that. We run great labs like the Candida metabolic vitamins test, the bacteria and parasite stool test, IgG food sensitivity tests, ship them all over the world. We talk all over the world. So this isn't just like a US thing or a Boston, Massachusetts thing, right? We're looking at people with digestive-based issues, and yes, they can have candida, yes, they can have bacterial overgrowth, but I've said this before, the only people that we don't see necessarily recover that first round, which is typically 12 weeks, is because of stress and anxiety-induced stomach issues. Because what happens is this is kind of the mystery for those people that have done something like the CBO protocol already, and it might have come back. A lot of people hold their tension in their gut, not their shoulders, not their head. They're not getting headaches. They're not getting migraines. They're not getting eye strain. What they're getting is actual digestive-based issues. There's a lack of stomach acid production. There's a lack then of bile production. There's a lack of pancreatic enzymes sometimes. But what also happens is there's slower peristaltic movement. So bacteria can begin to fester and build up in the stomach. It can build up in the intestines. The bowel movement sometimes becomes slower, or they get looser stool multiple times per day. But it's not normal. So what happens is the actual microbiome becomes imbalanced because of higher levels of stress, because there isn't normal movement through the 28 feet of digestive tract. And if there's not normal movement, the pH changes, bacteria is allowed to actually come up from the colon back into the small intestine, and people can actually give themselves SIBO over and over and over. So if you've been dealing with bacterial overgrowth, very well could be stress and anxiety based. So what do? Well, we help them with more of the stress-based issues, with realizing that they're going to get recurring issues if they don't fix the underlying stress, right? And of course, we work with teams of people, and we highly recommend talking with a good therapist, as well as doing things like exercise and many other things that I've talked about on the show that help with that, a lot of it being breath work. Okay, so next up, let's give you one more. Well, let's give you a couple more. I wanted to give you 12. I'm going to give you 12. So sleep being erratic. Many people with anxiety, their minds are always on. They can't fall asleep for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes more. I used to be one of those people. Anxiety, I guess that's really what it was. Because I say that today because I've done so much work on myself, and I say that because, it didn't just happen overnight. I didn't This wasn't created. I read, I learned, I applied, I failed, I didn't give up. I would get back at it and fail again and get back at it. And I would learn, I would grow. And then, now to the time, I don't really have anxiety. I honestly don't. So I went from someone with severe insomnia. Some people it takes hours to fall asleep, and some people wake up throughout the night. Two different forms of erratic sleep. And certainly could be higher levels of cortisol production, lower levels of serotonin, lower levels of melatonin. There's so many reasons why, right? Eating too close to bed, drinking alcohol before bed, all sorts of different reasons why. But I'm telling you right now, you can figure it out, and you should. You really should, because sleep is what helps you regenerate that body. Shortness of breath, I don't believe that I touched on. So I want to share with you that many people can't feel like they're catching their breath or they're not getting enough oxygen in. I hear that quite often. It feels like I can't get enough wind in, enough oxygen in. And that is because they're chest breathing. They are not actually relaxing that into the parasympathetic nervous system, which enables you to breathe into more of the into the lower lobes of the lungs, right? So the lower lobes of the lungs is what's going to actually allow you to get more oxygen, more volume into those lungs, which will then better oxygenate your body. And you know what it also does? Oxygenates your brain. So if you're not getting enough oxygen in because you are, let's say, doing shallow breathing because you're in a state of fight or flight, well, then all of a sudden you start to get dizzy. You start to get lightheaded because you're doing these shallow breaths instead of the diaphragmatic breaths. So really, really important to look at all of those specific issues. And one more I'd like to give you is this. So we're at a time right now where we're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that we stay healthy, that we boost our immune systems. Well, having anxiety is a sure sign that you are stressed, that you're worried about something, that you're putting out higher levels of stress hormones, which automatically lowers the immune system. So if you lower the immune system, you typically have what's called less of a first-line defense. So that means that the secretory IgA, the immunoglobulin A, which is really in the nasal cavity, it's in the mouth, it's all the mucous membranes. So there's a specific part of mucosal-based immunity that all of us have. And just one of those white blood cells or immunoglobulins is called secretory IgA. Now we have IgM, we have IgG, we have IgE, we have all different types of immunoglobulins. Some work quickly, some are a little bit delayed, but regardless, that's just one part of our immune system. Well, we know that when we produce higher levels of cortisol, many of those immune cells become depressed over time or suppressed over time. So in the short term, a little bit of stress, not a problem. When it's chronic stress, it begins to manifest itself in all of these different signs and also with the feelings of anxiety. So if you've been dealing with any of these symptoms that I gave you today, I can't recommend enough. Yes, running the lab is great. You can actually look at the cortisol levels. You can look at your testosterone, estrogen, DHEA, progesterone, estrogen to progesterone ratio, your thyroid. They're all great. You can absolutely do that. You can look at your digestive system. And again, I recommend it. But at the same time, you're correcting stress hormones, you're correcting digestive issues, you're correcting heavy metals, you're correcting omega-3s, whatever it might be. I also recommend not overlooking lifestyle, not overlooking the mental health part to this. When I wrote my book, The Rain Barrel Effect, and again, I mentioned that, yes, of course, I do promote it, but do understand 100% of all profits go to charity. I wrote that book to share with people exactly what I do in my practice and what we've been doing now for many years. We've seen absolutely dramatic recoveries, but it's really focused, and a lot of people get overwhelmed. They say, I need to do all these supplements, all these different things. Keep in mind that that's for the short term. Yes, the short term absolutely does help you. In the long term, you might be doing a little something small for maintenance, but really what we're looking at for long-term results, to really, in addition to these protocols and labs, is a focus on good whole food nutrition, diet, exercise, stress reduction, all the different techniques that I speak about, toxin removal, emotional-based balance, and any different types of trauma or past events that might still be with you, looking at your sleep and rest, looking at scientific-based supplement protocols, and a success mindset. That's what I call the de-stress protocol. If you have all of those factors, all of those different parts, the nice thing is you don't need to be perfect at any one. That's the great thing. And what we find over time is that they all help each other out. The diet helps the exercise. Well, the exercise certainly helps the diet. We detoxify better when we're sweating. We can do functional medicine detoxes, which then lightens the load. lightens the amount of stuff that we have in the body. When we begin to focus on our sleep, we're more rejuvenated. We have more energy. We don't need as much caffeine, which also stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. So you can see all of these things work together. And the great thing is, you can be 80%. You can do 80, 90%. And if you do that, you're still doing great because you have the synergies. You have all of them working together rather than putting all of your eggs in one basket. So my recommendation to you is really to begin to look into an overall healthier lifestyle. You'll be absolutely amazed at how a healthy lifestyle and nutrition and all these things that go along with it actually help mental health as well, because the mind and body truly are connected. Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. If it was helpful, and I certainly hope that it was, but if it was, please do feel free to share this show with anyone you believe it could serve. Thank you so much. Take care. Have an amazing day. Ever wonder what the best sauna, blue blockers, sleep trackers, wake lights, salt lamps, or other health gadgets are? Or what about the top non-toxic mattresses, sheets, soaps, bath products, toothpaste, and cookware? Or would you like to know the cleanest choices for hemp parts, meal delivery services, supplements, and much more? I personally curated, researched, and now created a resource page of all of my top picks that continues to grow each week. These are the exact products I use in my own life, with my family, in my private practice, and they're the ones I trust. To find out all of my up-to-date recommendations and all the details, simply head on over to stephencabral.com/resources.